Nicholas Meregali is well known for his exploits in the world of Jiu-Jitsu. He's a ferocious competitor and already won most of the titles that there is to win. He's already a world champion at black belt, and he's a multiple-time Brazilian national champion. But as always with high-level competitors in any sport, that same drive and determination that got him to the top was spurring him on to achieve even more. In 2022, he decided to set his eyes on a goal that no one had ever achieved in the history of the sport.
He's there, he's like, John, I want to be the first guy to win gi open weight and ADCC open weight in the same year.
Yeah. To the untrained eye, this might seem completely logical. A former gi world champion simply taking off the gi and adding another bit of silverware to his collection. But in reality, these two sides of the sport are worlds apart.
In my mind, I'm thinking like, yeah, that's never gonna happen, you weirdo.
There's definitely a case for the majority of no gi techniques still being useful in the gi, because you still have all of the same grips and techniques available to you. But the same can't be said when you reverse the situation, especially as a lot of Nicholas's game was based around the lasso guard and loop chokes and other things that utilise the gi pretty well. To make matters even worse for him, a lot of athletes typically cross-train for the majority of their career. You even see a lot of predominantly no-gi athletes putting on a gi from time to time. But up to this point in his career, Nicholas had not had a single no-gi training session ever. So the mere fact that he was even setting this goal was extremely audacious.
Do you think there was a degree to which he actually believed that?
A degree? He thought it was like a certainty.
We've also overlooked the small task of him winning the open weight in the IBJJF gi worlds, which would put him into a select group of Jiu-Jitsu legends. So after the disappointment of the 2021 IBJJF World Championships, where Meregali reached the final in both his division and the open class, but was disqualified for his conduct, we're back at the IBJJF 2022 Championships in June, where he had a shot to tick off the first part of his goal. He faced Wallace Costa in the quarterfinals, who he dispatched with a loop choke with about 4 minutes left in the match. Next up, he faced Felipe Andrew in the semis. After a tough match, he claims victory via an armbar, and with that, he's into the finals. The man that would be standing opposite him was Eric Muniz, the same man that stopped him winning his division that year by beating him on points. After a very cagey, close match, Meregali managed to win by an advantage.
Out the back door almost. Oh, he does get the advantage for that position.
Taking his first ever openweight title, but more importantly, ticking off the first part of his lofty 2022 dream.
Meregali finally claims the black belt absolute.
So with the first part of his goal now complete, he could firmly set his sights on the potentially bigger task of winning the biggest competition in Jiu-Jitsu, which is ADCC. To do this, he enlisted the help of arguably the best Jiu-Jitsu coach on the planet, Mr. John Danaher. Meregali had started training with Danaher and the rest of the New Wave team about 6 months before he would compete against the best no-gi grapplers in the world. Yep, you heard that right, 6 months. Meregali was giving himself just 6 months to go up against people like Craig Jones, Felipe Pena, Yuri Somos, and the rest of the no-gi elite, who have all been training in that specific discipline for decades. In the lead up to ADCC, Meregali had a few warm-up fights to get comfortable in his new attire on a series of Who's Number One events, the first of which was against Arnaldo Maidana. This was our first look at how Meregali was going to do without the gi, and if he was up to standard to even compete at ADCC, let alone challenge for an absolute title. We immediately saw a different Nicholas Meregali. We saw someone that was willing to stand up and wrestle and look for collar ties and single legs, and ultimately he went on to win the match via submission, and he got an armbar with only 30 seconds left.
Meregali looking for the Kimura, looking for the armbar. Can he get the submission? Yes, he does!
His first ever no-gi match was completed and he'd won it by submission, but he was definitely going to face much greater opponents than Maidana at ADCC. His next test was against Braylor Grout, who's a brown belt under Keenan Cornelius and was recently featured on the Who's Next reality show by Flow. Here we had a chance to answer one of the big questions facing Meregali. How would he deal with the leg attacks that are much more prominent in the no-gi game? Leg attacks have absolutely transformed the no-gi game in the last decade. Because of his focus on the gi side of the sport, a lot of people thought this is where he would come undone. But he answered the leg attacks pretty well and showed that he wasn't afraid to get into leg entanglements, probably because he now trains under the guy that pretty much started the leg lock movement. In the 13th minute of the match, he submitted Braylor via arm triangle.
That looks good.
There is the finish!
And he never really looked in any danger. So he would have one more test before ADCC, and a test that would be much harder than all the others. A matchup with none other than Rafael Lovato Jr., a legend in both BJJ and MMA, and a no-gi world champion. This was a huge step up in competition for Meregali, and despite not being able to get the finish, the sheer dominance he showed over a no-gi world champion and a legend like Rafael was unbelievable, and it left a lot of us pretty excited to see what it would be like at ADCC.
What an incredible performance. That really was a masterclass in no-gi technique.
So, we arrive at ADCC in September 2022, just 6 months after Meregali had started his no-gi journey. But could he really win an absolute world title on his first attempt? First, he'd have to compete in his under 99 kilo division, which is absolutely stacked with the best grapplers from around the world. You have the likes of Kaynan Duarte, Craig Jones, Yuri Simões, just to name a few. In his first round, he had fellow Brazilian Henrique Ciccone, and after having somewhat of a rough start...
Oh, big arm drag from Henrique Ciccone, up and down!
Welcome to ADCC, Nicholas. He ultimately turned the tide to finish Ciccone with a Kimura before the points had even started. Next up, Yuri Simões. Yuri is a two-time ADCC champion and multiple-time no-gi world champion, and arguably one of the very best grapplers on the planet. After a grueling 15-minute match where Meregali won by the smallest of margins, a ref's decision, but he moved through to the semi-final to face Craig Jones. After another grueling 15-minute match, this time Meregali was on the wrong side of the ref's decision and was out of the competition.
Craig Jones! B-Team's Craig Jones is going to move on to the finals.
But he still had it all to play for in the Absolute Division, which was the title that he was really going for. He started his Absolute Division campaign with a submission win over Traitor Ferreira, as he injured himself trying to spin out of Meregali's open guard. But this moved him into a quarter-final matchup with the under-88 ADCC champion and fellow teammate Giancarlo Bodoni. At the end of the 10-minute match, Meregali was the one with his hand raised. After taking Giancarlo's back pretty early into the match and staying there for a large portion of it, he ended up winning the fight 6-2. Next up was Tai Ruotolo. Tai had taken out Felipe Pena on his route to the semis, and although he took an unexpected early exit in his division to Josh Hinger, he would definitely be a tough opponent. The match went all the way to a ref decision, with Meregali finding himself in the final against Yuri Simões.
It will be Nicholas Meregali moving on to the final.
The same Yuri Simões that he'd beat in his division the day before. This was it, the unobtainable, almost crazy dream of winning the open class in the gi and then immediately transitioning over to ADCC and winning the absolute title there was finally here. He was one match away from actually doing it. 3 minutes into the match, Meregali chose to pull guard off a single leg attempt from Yuri, a decision that would ultimately cost him dearly.
So that should be a -1.
Under the ADCC rule set, guard pulls in the finals are punished with negative points at any point throughout the match. Meregali was unable to get this point back and attempted a second guard pull late into the match in a bid to score some points of his own. He'd come so close to what so many considered impossible. Even John Danaher, when he first heard of Nicholas's goal, thought he was completely crazy.
When he mentioned the goal to me, I was, as I said, just looking at him in almost like disbelief. I didn't want to show it on my face.
But to come so close to actually achieving it was completely remarkable. So many people thought he wouldn't even be able to win a match at ADCC, let alone win a bronze in his division and then a silver in the absolute.
So he set an audacious goal so high that it seemed impossible, and it pulled his entire performance up to a level where even failure creates something truly memorable.
For me, it was the most impressive transition to no-gi that we've ever seen. And I, for one, am very excited for Nicholas Meregali's no-gi future.